So Be'ez Hashem, we'll learn a little bit this Sicha on Parshas Pinchas, Likutei Sichos Chelik Yud. So the Sicha is going to deal with this issue of an argument between, an apparent argument or contradiction between a teaching that's found in the Zohar, which is the prominent and most important text of Kabbalah, and a teaching that's found in the Gemara, in Chazal, in the Shas, in the Talmud. So before we get into this, before we get into the text, by way of introduction, we just have to understand a basic fundamental understanding that has to be understood. Generally, if there's an argument, if there's two opinions, if there's an argument between what it says in the Gemara, what it says in Chazal, and the Talmud, and something that says in Kabbalah, which means there's an argument between the Poskim and Kabbalah, between the codifiers of Jewish law and the sources of Kabbalah. So generally, the opinion is that we follow the opinion of the Poskim. This is explained in great length by the Radbaz, the Bezimri, in Chassidus, his fourth part, Siman Pei. The Radbaz was also a teacher of the Holy Ari. That anytime there's an argument between the Poskim and the Mekubalim, between the codifiers of halacha, of Jewish law, and the Kabbalists, the Mekubalim, so we follow the rule follows according to the Poskim, according to what it says in halacha and law. And he concludes that la'atzmi, for myself personally, if it's a chumrah, if it's a particular stringency that says in Kabbalah that doesn't say in the Talmud or in the Poskim and the other codifiers of law, I follow the stringency. But if it's if something that says in Kabbalah brings a leniency to the practice, like Achish law, I don't actually practice it, I don't listen to it. And the same thing also explained in Siman Lamed Vav, that the same idea that we follow the law follows the practice of the Poskim and what it says in halacha, what it says in terms of what it was going to say in terms of what it says in Talmud against what it says in Kabbalah. If there's a contradiction. So at this time period in history, it's interesting to note that it's the first time during the time of the Radbaz, and then a little bit further on during the times of the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, which is the first time that in a very prominent way, it's mentioned in earlier sources, but in a very prominent way, that the halachic writers of Shulchan Aruch, the halachic writers of law, of the Poskim, draw and bring in practices that originates either in the Zohar or later, after the Beis Yosef, following the practices that was brought down by the Arizal, by the Holy Ari, Isaac Luria. So, for example, the Magen Avram, many times, which is a classic commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, the Magen Avram brings down many times from the Ksavim, Isa B'Ksavim, it says in the writings, and that refers to the writings of the Ari. So, which is that in a certain stringency, we're going to practice according to what it says in the Kabbalah, what it says in the spiritual sources, versus what it says in more exoteric sources of the Talmud and the Poskim. But the Beis Yosef himself in the Beis Yosef, a few times actually mentions the Zohar a few times in his writings. And for example, when he talks about in Simcha Fei, with regard to making a bracha, whether we make two brachas when we put on tefillin, one for the hand tefillin, one for the head tefillin, or we make one bracha, that he brings down the Zohar, that according to the Zohar we should make one bracha, only on the hand tefillin, and the hand tefillin should also apply also for the head, one bracha. And but he says that since the Poskim rule differently, and contrary to the Zohar, then we're going to rule according to that way. If the maskat of the Gemara, if the conclusion of the Gemara is different than the conclusion of the Zohar, we're going to follow the law that says in the Gemara. Same thing also, somebody brings down Simcha Fei, that he brings down this idea from the Sefer Agur that the Zohar says that you're not allowed to put on tefillin before you've put on tzitzis. The first, the person has to put on his tzitzis, and then he puts on his tefillin. And there he writes like this is the way it should be properly done according to the Zohar. And this is also similar with what he writes also further on in Simul Lamed Aleph, very famously, that the Beis Yosef rules and says that even according to Rabbeinu Tam, you have to put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed, and you could put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed on the intermediary days on Pesach, on Sukkot. The Zohar says that you shouldn't. The Zohar actually says very strong words about someone that puts on tefillin on Chol Hamoed in these days, in the intermediary days on Pesach and on Sukkot. And the Zohar actually says Chayav Misa. So therefore, the Beis Yosef concludes here and says like this: since in our Talmud, in our Gemara, it doesn't say clearly whether we should put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed or not. Therefore, mi arav libo le'aver bekum v'asei al divrei harashbi. Who has the power to say differently than what it says in the Rashbi, what the Rashbi writes, in the Zohar? Therefore, we should not put on tefillin. So what the Beis Yosef is saying is, since there's a lack of clarity, there's ambiguity in the Talmud itself, in the Gemara itself, whether we should put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed, therefore we're going to follow the opinion of the Zohar. So this is generally the consensus amongst all the great scholars, that if there's an argument, you follow the Talmud versus the Zohar, or you follow the Talmud versus the Kabbalah. You follow the Pinson versus the Kabbalah, the codifiers versus the Kabbalists. But when there's a possibility to follow both, and they're not going to be in contradiction to each other, we should follow the Zohar, we should follow the Kabbalah. Like the Beis Yosef says, who could argue with what it says in the Zohar? Who could argue what the Rashbi writes? And therefore we should follow. And it's not so much because of the Zohar, but it has to do more because it's a Kadmon, it's a Tana. It's one of the early Tanoim, one of the later Tanoim. So therefore we should follow this opinion. This is generally in the world in the halachic view between this conversation, when there's a conversation between these two sources. In this particular sikha that we're going to learn, this is going to be seemingly contradictory statements between the way the Gemara understands one topic, the way it's understood, and the way the Zohar understands the other topic, and some type of reconciliation between two opinions, but from a deeper perspective to understand why the Zohar comes to its conclusion versus the way the Gemara comes to its conclusion, which the Gemara represents the external aspect of the Torah, the law, and where the Zohar represents the law, the inner aspect, the pnimius, the internality of the Torah. And therefore, from the perspective of the externality of the Torah, from the perspective of the perception, ein l'dayin mashan erois, which is the world of halacha, the world of law, follows what the eyes can see, the observable reality, the way it's seen from the level of chitzonis, from the external. There's a certain way of perceiving things, and then there's a level of seeing it from the pnimius, from a more internal level. Therefore, the Zohar is going to say something a little bit different, and therefore, even lahalacha, even according to the law, we're actually going to practice what it says in the Zohar. Okay, this is by way of introduction. So the Sikha basically is based on a Zohar in this week's parsha, a chapter in the Zohar in this week's Torah portion. And the Zohar says like this: whoever says the verse Tehillah David, the chapter in Psalm Tehillah David, is zoicha to receive merits, to receive Zimnun is ready to prepare to receive the world to come. This is similar to a teaching that we have actually in the Gemara, in Brachas, in the beginning of Brachas, the Gemara says, Kol ha'omer Tehillah David b'chol yom. Whoever says Tehillah David 3 times a day, muftach l'shu ben olam haba, is certainly a person is granted a share in the world to come. And the Gemara over there explains that it's for 2 reasons, because this passage in Tehillim, in Psalms, has a quality that is not found in any other chapter in Tehillim, which is that both it's an acrostic, so it has the entire alphabet besides letter Nun. Each verse starts etc. Each verse starts with an aleph, with a beis, a gimel, a dalet, etc. Besides the letter nun, and also it has a very essential verse. Says this: that Hashem opens His hands, or please God, please Hashem, open your hands and sustain all creation. So, because the Gemara says, the Talmud says, because it's such a special chapter in Psalms that muftach le'shalom. Then the Zohar continues, which is similar to this Zohar. Then the Zohar says, Trei zimne b'choyev, twice. So the Zohar says you should say this chapter of Tehillim 3 times. Twice is an obligation. The third time, lav begin choyev, not because it's an obligation to say it, rather elo begin shvacha, but to speak about it, not as requests, but in terms of singing praise. So Reb Levi Yitzchak, the saintly father of the Rebbe, wrote a commentary on the Zohar, famously when he was in exile, and he had no other storm, and he was just writing commentaries in the margins of the Zohar. So he writes there that the 3 times the Zohar you should read, you should say Tehillah Dav, this chapter in Tehillim, corresponds to the 3 tefillas that a person is supposed to pray every day, Shachar and Chabad, 3 times that a person has to say, which is actually what Rashi himself writes in the commentary of the Gemara. It's 3 times we have to daven, 3 prayers a day. It says that just like the 2 tefillas and mincha, the morning and afternoon service, is a choiva, is an obligation. Therefore, that's what the Zohar says. That the first 2 ones we should say it as obligatory. We should say them. The third one is begin shvacha. The Zohar says that the third time we say Tehillah David is a form of just singing Hashem's praise, not requesting but singing praise. So Reb Levi says this corresponds to the 3rd prayer, the 3rd tefillah of the day, which is Ma'ariv, the 3rd prayer. Ma'ariv is an argument in Gemara amongst Chazal whether tefillas arvis is a choiva or a shus. Is it an obligation or it's something that is not obligatory, but it's just something we could do? The halacha is tefillah arvis is shus. The law follows the opinion that arvis generally is considered a shus, even though we accept it as an obligation, but principally it's not an obligation. So therefore, that's what the Zohar said, that the 3rd time is dissimilar than the first 2 times. The first 2 times is an obligation to say it, and it's as a form of request. The 3rd time is a form of singing praise, corresponding to the 3rd idea, the 3rd prayer, the 3rd tefillah of the day, which is Ma'ariv, which is not a chayiv, but a reshus, not an obligation, but something that's optional. This is what Reb Levi says. Now, the Tzemach Tzedek, the 3rd Chabad Rebbe, the 3rd Rebbe, in his commentary on the book of Tehillim, Yalor brings this Rashi, and the 3 davenings, the 3 times that we have to say Tehillah David correspond to the 3 davenings, and he asks, if this is the case, that they correspond to 3 davenings, which Rashi says that the 3 times of Tehillah David corresponds to the 3 times of prayer, so then we should say Ashrei or Tehillah David 3 times, once by Shacharis, once by Mincha, and once by Ma'ariv. The way it's actually done today, the way it's practiced, is that Ashrei is recited during Psukkah de Zimra on Shacharis, which means it's recited before the Amidah, before Shemon Esrei in Shacharis. Then it's recited after Shemon Esrei, again the 2nd time during Shacharis, during the morning service. So it's recited twice during the morning service, and it's recited a third time before the Mincha service. Now, if we say, this is what the Tzemach Tzedek is asking, if we say that the 3 times correspond to the 3 prayers, then just like before Shacharis, meaning before the Amidah of Shacharis, before the standing prayer of Shacharis, we say Ashrei, we say Tehillah David, and before the standing prayer we say Mincha, we say Ashrei. The same thing also, we should say also, the 3rd time we should say also before Ma'ariv, but that's not the way it's practiced. The way it's practiced is we say twice, once before the Amidah, once after the Amidah and Shacharis, and once before Mincha. But why don't we say it if it corresponds to the three prayers? Then we should say it three times. And we do say it three times, but the three times should be once by Shacharis before the Amidah, once by Mincha before the Amidah, once by Meir before the Amidah. So he brings down that there's the Leo Rabbah and the Levush. Others say because it's impossible to say Tehillah David by night, because Ein Zman Tehillah with Laila, it's not a time to sing praise. This is a more Kabbalistic reason that you're not allowed to say Tehillim by night in general. It's a time of Klip, etc. But this idea not to say, or Einam Kedusha Bal Arvis, you don't say Kedusha, we don't say Nakdishach during Ma'ariv. So maybe that's the reason. But the Zohar is not satisfied with these reasons, and he said if the third time was established because of Ma'ariv, and that was the reason, then it doesn't make any sense that we should say it during Shacharis, and you should say it by Shacharis twice, in the morning service twice, and not say it by Ma'ariv. So therefore, what the Samach Tzedek says like this, that when the Talmud, the Gemara says that we say three times this chapter of Psalms, corresponding to the three prayers, this goes according to the opinion that Ma'ariv, that the evening service is actually a chayiv, it's an obligation. So therefore, according to that, you say once in Shacharis, once in Mincha, and once in Ma'ariv. And that's what the Gemara means. That's what the Talmud means. Three times. Actually, it does mean that. It means what you should say once before Shacharis, which means before the Amidah of Shacharis. Once you should say before Mincha, and once you should say before Ma'ariv. We rule, like the Gemara says, we rule at the end of the day, like the Gemara says, Chazayin, the Gemara that we hold that Tfilas Arvis is Rishus, that the evening service is only not obligatory. Therefore, we don't say Ashrei before Ma'ariv. Therefore, we don't say Ashrei. So, in other words, when the Gemara says that you should say Ashrei three times a day, corresponding, which Rashi said they correspond to the three times that we daven, Shachas, Mincha, Ma'ariv. That's only according to the opinion that we say Ma'ariv is a chayva, is an obligation, and according to that opinion, we would actually say Ashrei before Shachas, before Mincha, before Ma'ariv. But we rule that Tfilas Arvis is Rishus, that Ma'ariv is only a Rishus, it's not an obligation. So therefore, we don't have to say Ashrei three times, because we only say that it's corresponding to the prayer, to the chiyuv of the prayer. We only chiyuv the prayer to daven twice a day, Shachas and Minchas. Therefore, someone said, according to that opinion, you would actually only have to say Ashrei twice. Yeah. That's the reason that the Samach Tzedek explains that in fact, according to the way we understand it, we should only say twice Tehillah David, twice Ashrei, corresponding to Shachar and Mincha, and we don't need Ma'ariv, because spiritually, what this means is that the Ashrei, the Tehillah David that we say by Shachar and Mincha, has an effect. Or it's just like in Shachar Mincha, we have to do something to affect this idea. Whatever Ashrei affects happens during Shachar Mincha. This happens on its own during Ma'ariv, according to the opinion that says it's Rishus. So therefore, we'd have to do it twice. So the question that the Rebbe has now is: how does this jive? How is this consistent with the opinion which his father brought down, that the third time is corresponding to Tfilas Arvis Rishus? In other words, what the Rebbe's father was saying is that the Zohar says you should say it three times. The first two times you should say it as an obligation, as a request. The third time you should say it as singing Hashem's praise. So the Rebbe's father wrote, what does the Rebbe wrote? So what does that mean? That means it's according to the opinion that we rule that the Ma'ariv is only a Rishus, is not an obligation. So the first two times, Shachas and Mincha is an obligation. And the third time is Rishus. Therefore, that third time that we say Ashrei is not an obligation, but it's said more like in terms of Shvach. So according to that opinion, according to the way the Rebbe is reading the Zohar, you actually do have to say it three times. And they do correspond even to the opinion that says Tfilas Arvis Rishus, that Tfilah Ma'ariv is only not an obligation. And that's why you say it B'derech Shvach, you say it like thanksgiving and singing praise. But the Samach Tzedek says according to the Tzemach Tzedek, you would only need to say it twice, because the Tzemach Tzedek is understanding the Gemara that says that you need to say it 3 times, according to the opinion that the third time corresponds to Ma'ariv, and Ma'ariv is an obligation. But according to the opinion that says the Ma'ariv is not an obligation, you don't have to say it twice. So how does these two opinions? So it comes out. It seems to say that according to the Zohar, you have to say it 3 times, even according to the opinion that says that Ma'ariv is not an obligation. And according to the way he reads the Gemara, is that according to the Gemara, when it says you have to read 3 times, that's only according to the opinion that says that Ma'ariv is an obligation. But according to the opinion that says Ma'ariv is not an obligation, then you only have to read it twice. So essentially, according to the Gemara, you should read it 3 times, and even according to the way we rule that Ma'ariv is only not, and Ma'ariv is Rishus, is not an obligation, and according to the Gemara, according to the Talmud, you only have to read it twice. So that seems to be a contradiction between these two opinions. Yeah. Then the question is, according to the Tzemach Tzedek, the way he reads the Gemara, which seems to be Rashi reads the Gemara the same way. According to Tzemach Tzedek reads the Gemara, that says you have to read 3 times according to the opinion according to the opinion that 3 times is an obligation to daven, that the Ma'ariv is also an obligatory prayer. So then why do you? But we don't rule that way. We rule that Ma'ariv is a Rishus, which the Tzemach Tzedek seems to say that according to that opinion, we would only have to read it twice. We don't have to say Ashrei twice. So why in fact do we say it 3 times? Do we need to say it 3 times? So why do we say it twice in Shachars, according to the Talmud, according to the Gemara, according to the Tzemach Tzedek's reading of the Gemara? So the Rebbe basically starts saying, says that it's quite simple, that if you read a little bit deeper into what this conversation is, you'll see that the Tzemach Tzedek is speaking about the opinion of the Gemara, the Shas, the Gemara, Pinigla the Torah, it's revealed in the Torah. And that, therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek says that according to the Gemara, according to Shas, according to Chazal, according to the Gemara and Brachas, you actually only have to read twice. That's a fact. You don't have to read it twice. Today, we don't have to only read it twice. But the Reb Leivik is talking about according to the Zohar, which is the pnimis of the Torah, the internal aspect of the Torah, the inner aspect of the Torah. And according to the inner aspect of the Torah, even the opinion that says you only have to do Rishus, that Ma'ariv is only Rishus, not an obligation, you still have to read it twice. 3 times. Yeah. So to understand this a little bit different, a little to understand the pnimis of this idea, what's this argument seemingly argument between the Gemara and according to the Zohar? So according to the Gemara, you have to read it only twice. According to the Zohar, you have to read it 3 times. And we actually rule, according to the Zohar, that we have to read it 3 times, but we read it during Shachars, not during Ma'ariv. So let's understand it. Another question that the Rebbe asked before he gets into the understanding of this is that we say that the opinion that Tfilah is this means that even though there's something that's being drawn down every time we daven, every time we pray, there's a certain hamshachah, there's a certain drawing down, we're drawing down moichin into this world, a certain type of higher intelligence, a certain type of blessing, a certain type of shefa we're drawing down into this world. So the question is, do we have to do it twice or 3 times? Twice would mean you do it in the morning, which is the transitioning between night and day, and therefore we're drawing down a new light that's being drawn down into this world. We also have to do this during the midday, during mincha time, or moving towards the evening, which is a transition between the afternoon and the evening, moving towards between light and darkness. And then the question is, Arvis, during Ma'ariv time, when it's already dark, or at least according to the Chacham, when it's already dark, is there also some type of transition from day to night? And if that transition also warrants a drawing down of a new light, and therefore we're obligated to daven this third davening, or does that third, or the third shefa that come down, in the Ma'ariv time, during the evening time, which evening time represents the time that a person goes to sleep, which is not a time of avoid, not a person's service, not a person that's active and creative, but in fact, they're sleeping, and the world is sleeping. That represents this consciousness of sleep state. Does that mean the opinion that says that Ma'ariv is only a reshus? The Ma'ariv is not an obligation, it's not obligatory. Is saying because during the Ma'ariv time, what happens during the evening time at night is that the or comes down b'derech l'meila. The or has to be drawn down. The light has to be drawn down, which we draw down during Shachar and Mincha. That already comes on its own. Yet Chazal say that it's still a reshus, that it's still something that we should do. It's not an obligation, but it's something that is recommended that we do. So why is that not true with regards in the Gemara's conception? Why is it not true that we should also do that during Ma'ariv? That also during Ma'ariv we should say Ashrei, Tehillah David a third time, maybe not as a choiv, but as a reshus, not an obligation, but just like we do Ma'ariv. We said that even though Ma'ariv, the Amshacha, the drawing down, happens on its own, still we participate in that drawing down somewhat, and therefore we should do something for Ma'ariv, even though it's not obligatory, we don't have to do it. The same thing also, it would seem that with Ashrei, even though we don't have to say Ashrei, maybe we should say Ashrei. So the explanation that the Sikha explains is as follows, that when we talk about that there are certain hamshacha, certain drawing downs of light, of oil that comes down to this world that is connected to our own personal avodah, to our own personal service. That means that it's man stimulating this process. And then there are things that come b'derech hamela, come on its own. There's certain oil that is drawn into this world, whether we do it or we don't do it. And there's two types of that. There's two ways to think about that. There are some things that is in ganzen Sachen von avodas Adam. There's certain things like Kriyas Yamsuf. The Rebbe gives an example of Kriyas Yamsuf. Kriyas Yamsuf is the splitting of the sea, and the splitting of the sea is such a phenomenal, transcendent or shefa light of Hashem's presence that came down to this world, that what Klal Yisrael we had to do in order to receive that light is tachrishu. We have to be quiet. That means we should do nothing. In fact, doing something can actually ruin the thing that is trying to be revealed. Because doing something means that we're participating, that our presence, our finite vessel is present in this light. The real way to receive this light of infinite light that's beyond the capacity of the human being to articulate and to draw down, which means it's an infinite light, is that the vessel, which is us, our consciousness and our being and our doing, should cease to be. So we do nothing. And by doing nothing, we actually open ourselves to receive the everything. That's one type of drawing of light. That's one type of amshacha, one type of light, one type of revelation that comes down that is beyond our capacity. And therefore, the less we're involved, the more possible for this thing to be revealed to us. But then there is another, that's one madrega, that's one level. Then there's another madrega that it's not possible to be an obligatory action. It can't be that it's a choiva that we have to do it. But it's a reshus. It's recommended to do it, because over here, not pshat doesn't mean that we're drawing down this light. It's not so ufton, not to create this drawing down of this particular light, because it's transcendent. Because if we were able to draw it down, that would be an obligation to do it. But it actually comes on its own. Nor b'chdei damshacha. That the point of us doing something is to participate in the unfolding of this light that's being drawn down, which means that we should receive it in the correct way. So there's one way to receive something, that the light is so great and so infinite, that the only way to be open to this experience is to completely collapse the existence of finitude, therefore do nothing. There's another type of light that comes down. It is transcendent of our own experience. This is beyond us. It's something that's incomprehensible and unquantifiable in terms of our own consciousness and our own being. Yet, in order for this light to be, this drawing, this revelation to be revealed to us in an integrated way and in a wholesome way, and to permeate really into our entire being, we have to participate, not as an obligation, not that we have to do, but in order for it to be correct, in order for it to be assimilated correctly within our own being, we have to participate. Participation in the second structure is not to create the drawing of this light, but more in terms of the receiving of this light. This is the principle. Yeah. So he says this is what it means. Tefillah Saris Rishus. The tefillah, the ma'ariv, the way the halacha is, even though but the idea, the halacha is that it's rishus, that it's not an obligation, is because the yichud, the unity, the spiritual unity, the cosmic unity that happens between the Kodesh Baruch Hu and Shechinte, between Abba and Ima, all this spiritual cosmic unity that creates a new flow of light into this world, happens with Derech Melech, happens automatically. That's in general the idea of a night. The whole idea of night is you sleep, that something's happening on its own, that you're not participating. However, even though it's a revelation that comes Derech Melech on its own, there's still a participation. And the participation is that the light, what is being drawn, the shefa that is being drawn, the flow that's being drawn into this world, should be received in a way that's blessing. So you do participate. The participation is not to create it, but to receive it. That's why Ma'ariv, the third prayer, the evening prayer, even though technically, halachically, it's not an obligation, still we participate because we want what is being revealed to us, and what's being revealed to this world, should be to us as a blessing. So now the Rebbe says, we can understand what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying. That what is the purpose, which we never explained, what is the purpose of Tehillah David? So the Tzemach Tzedek says that what is the purpose of reciting this chapter of Psalms? So the Gemara says that it's a very special chapter in Tehillim because it has the Aleph Beis, it has the entire acrostic of all the entire letters of the Aleph Beis besides the Nun, and it also says B'zeh Chasedecha, it says Hashem open your hand, obviously metaphorically. But the Tzemach Tzedek explains on a deeper level is because the Tehillah David is to Ma'oyer, is Maschel Shoyer Shaysoyer Sayichutum. That Tehillah David is to create, to connect to the source, the shoyrish of the yichud between Kodesh Baruch Hu and between Zohar Malchus, which means the light of transcendence, the light of immanence, which is the world the way we see it, which is the immanent reality of creation, the observable reality, and there's the drawing of a higher level of light that comes onto this world. And the idea of Tehillah David, or reciting this chapter of Psalms, this chapter of Tehillim, especially reciting it with the Aleph Beis, is that we actually awaken the process of the revelation to come down to this world. So therefore the Rebbe says that's why we can understand why there is no reason to say, or there's no possibility, we can't say Tehillah David on Tehillah David and Meir, but we should have a Meir. Because the reason why we have a Meir is not to create the Yichud. The reason why we have a Meir is so we should receive the light that's created through this Yichud, the oil that's created through this Yichud, through this unity between the higher and the lower, the transcendent and the immanent, that we should receive that light of transcendence in our own immanence, that it should be received and inculcated and assimilated in the correct way. So therefore it could be rishus, because we're participating in the process, not participating that we're creating the process, participating in the process that we're receiving the process. But since Tehillah David, the purpose of Ashrei is to create it, since a person, but that we can't do. That's beyond Avodah Zarah. That happens on its own. So since it happens on its own, the Tehillah David, therefore we don't say Tehillah David. That's going to answer the question why, even according to the opinion that says Rishus, that it's not an obligation, we still daven Ma'ariv, we still pray the evening service, but we don't say Tehillah David a third time. And that's to answer the Tzemach Tzedek's question, the question that was asked on the Tzemach Tzedek. And this explains according to this explains this according to the Nigla Torah, according to what it says in the Gemara. But according to Pnimis HaTorah, according to the inner aspect of Torah, according to the Zohar, there's still a reason to say Tehillah David, even though we say it during Shachris. So the Rebbe explains like this. The Nigla of the Torah, the revealed aspect of the Torah, connects us to, this is the Zohar says, that the revealed aspect of the Torah connects us to the revealed aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the Creator. And therefore, is nicht schach in Asim mitzad Adam, oft an the Yichud, weil Yichud nimmt sich von Pnimis HaKesser. Therefore, since it connects us only to the external aspect of the source, in the external aspect of the source, that's not the makar, that's not the source of the Yichud. The source of Yichud is in the world of Pnimi. But since in the world of the external, we exist in the world of externality, and since in the world of the Gemara is talking about the world of the external, therefore, we don't have the possibility to create Tehillah David, to create this new Yichud, because we're only speaking from the place of external, where we're the effect and not the cause. However, from the Pnimius level, from the internal level is the way the Zohar understands it. The Zohar is revealing the Pnimius, the Pnimius of Torah, the inner aspect of Torah, the inner aspect of Torah, which is connected to the inner aspect of Klal Yisrael, the inner aspect of Klal Yisrael, which is connected to the Sasim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the inner aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kilu, the inner of the Creator. Therefore, in that space, which is the source of everything, not the effect, but the cause, therefore, when we connect with the inner, the ultimate inner aspect of creation, which is connected to the ultimate inner aspect of a creator, we're actually connected to the cause. And because we're connected to the cause, therefore, we could do something. So therefore, we could create it. So that's what the Zohar is saying. The Zohar is saying is, in the Gemara, it's saying that you can't say Tehillah David the third time. It's only Rishus, because we're talking about the external. So since the external, we can't create something. We can only assimilate things that's beyond our capacity, our finite capacity. So therefore, we can receive things. In terms of receiving, we can say that it's Rishus, and therefore we should have a Ma'ariv. But according to the Zohar, we're talking about the inner aspect, the ultimate inner aspect of the neshama, which is connected to the inner. The Yisrael is connected to the inner aspect of the Creator, not creation, which is the root of all yichud, of all unity, of all oil, of all light, and all shefa that comes down to this world. So therefore, we could connect it. Nor the avoid in the madeg is nicht an oifen for choiv and abadach. However, this is paradoxical. Since, however, from the external aspect, we can actually say it like this. From the perspective of creation, where I'm a body, and I live in this, and you live in a physical world, and we live in this physical reality, and I have a physical, capabilities. In that world, I'm a creation. I'm part of the creation, not part of the creator. So I'm not part of the source itself. So I can't draw down from the source. I can receive the source in the proper way. That it should be for blessing. But I can't create it. That's from the perspective of the body. From the perspective of the soul, from the perspective of the pnimius of the person, the ultimate pnimius, ultimate internality of the person, the pnimius of the person is a chelik kalmi mal mamish, is part of the creator himself. The soul is part of the creator himself. So from the perspective of the creator, which we're one with the creator, from the perspective of the soul, we can actually draw it down. So on one hand we could draw it down, on hand we can't draw it down. From the perspective of the body we can, from the perspective of the soul we can. So how does it reflect actuality in terms of actual physical practice? Actual practice says, you can do it, but it's not an obligation. You can do it because of your soul. You can't do it because of your body. So you can do it, but not an obligation. So that's why Mitzad Pnimius is Shaykh Din Yochton. Yeah. The fire is Mitzad Pnimius, therefore, according to Pnimius, according to the Zohar, there is an idea to say Tilul David the third time. But that third time is not in a way that normally Tilul David, which is to completely create that reality and force it, but really in a way to say Shvach. Again, because it has that double-sided idea of what our previous and Achitzah is. Therefore, in order, this is what the conclusion of this idea is, therefore it says, in order to show that the third time Ashrei is principally an idea of Rishus, that it's not an obligation. It's not an obligation because it can be the body is we're in a state of creation, not creator. Yet from the other perspective, we could create it in a way of giving thanks because that's when we're part of the creator. So therefore, it's reflected in a way that the third time Tilul Dav is actually an Ashrei. The Chiddush, what the Rebbe is saying is that it's actually said in Psukei de Zimra, and the koyach to say that, the Tilul David actually comes from the yichud, from the unity that was created evening before, during Ma'ariv. So during Ma'ariv, there was a certain yichud that was revealed in this world, and that gives the koyach, that gives the power, which is beyond the capacity of man's participation. Therefore, it's a reshus. It's not an obligation. It's a higher light that's beyond the participation of man, even though it's received by man, but it's higher than participation of man. That becomes revealed as something that is an obligation in Shachris, where we're going to recite twice Ashrei. The first time that we're going to recite the Ashrei is going to be a continuation of the Ma'ariv that happened the night prior. This is a way to understand this very deep argument. On a superficial level, it seems to be a very simple argument between what the Zohar is saying and what the Gemara is saying, whether we should say it 3 times, which the Zohar says. Even the third time says it in a little different way, versus the Gemara that says you should say it only twice, according to the opinion, you only hold Rishus. And why is it that way? Because the Gemara is looking at it from the perspective of the Chitzoni as the external, and therefore that's something that we cannot create. Versus the Zohar is saying that it is a place that we could create because from the level of Pnimius, from the internal level, it is actually true that we actually are part of the creator. But since from the perspective of the body, we're not part of the creator, we're part of the creation, therefore it's reflected in a way that we say it, but we say it not as a chiyuv and an obligation, but we say it as saying Hashem's purpose.